She said she wanted the ride to end early. I should have listened. Alright, welcome back. If you're new here, this is where people send in the stuff that actually happened to them while working rideshare or delivery, the jobs where you're alone in a car with a stranger, or walking up to a stranger's door at night, more times in a week than most people do in a year. Today we've got two stories from drivers who've never fully shaken off what happened to them on shift. Let's get into the first one. Story 1, the 2 a.m. pickup. I drove for a rideshare app for almost 2 years, mostly picking up night shifts on weekends because the surge pricing made it worth staying out until 3 or 4 in the morning. I'd started doing it originally just to make some extra money on top of my regular job, but the night shifts specifically became almost a routine of their own. I liked the quiet roads, the way the city felt different after midnight, emptier but somehow more honest, if that makes any sense. Most of my rides were exactly what you'd expect: people leaving bars, couples arguing in the back seat about nothing, the occasional overly friendly drunk guy who wanted to talk about his ex-girlfriend the entire ride. I got good at reading people fast. Within 30 seconds of someone getting in my car, I could usually tell what kind of ride it was going to be, whether they wanted silence, small talk, or just needed someone to half listen while they vented about their night. I want to say upfront that I was never someone who got spooked easily. I'd had a few uncomfortable rides over the years: a guy who wouldn't stop staring at me in the rearview mirror, a woman who cried the entire 20 minutes and wouldn't say why, a couple who had what sounded like the tail end of a genuinely frightening argument right before getting into my car, but nothing that actually scared me in the sense of feeling like something was wrong beyond ordinary human messiness. Uncomfortable and scared are two very different things, and until this one night, I genuinely believed I understood the difference well enough to never confuse the two. It was a Tuesday, which already made the ride unusual. Weeknight rides after midnight were rare in my area, and when they did happen, they were almost always somebody coming home from a late shift at a hospital or a warehouse, the kind of tired, quiet passenger who just wants to get home and doesn't say much the whole way. I got a ping around 2:15 a.m. for a pickup at an address that Google Maps flagged as a residential street, nothing commercial nearby, no bars, no late-night restaurants, nothing that would explain why someone needed a ride from there at that specific hour. That alone wasn't strange on its own. People get rides from their own homes all the time for all sorts of reasons. What made me pause slightly was the destination. It was almost exactly the same distance from the pickup as if the app was routing me in a large, pointless loop, ending barely a mile from where I'd be picking her up, which meant the fare itself was going to be small, hardly worth the drive out to get her in the first place. I pulled up to the address, and a woman came out almost immediately, like she'd been standing right by the door waiting for the car to arrive, watching through a window or peephole for headlights to show up. She was maybe mid-20s, wearing a jacket zipped all the way up despite it being a warm night, and she got into the back seat without saying much beyond a quiet hello. I confirmed her name, she confirmed mine, and I started driving, running through my usual mental checklist without really thinking about it: mirrors, seatbelt reminder, GPS route pulled up on my phone mount. For the first few minutes, nothing was off. She was on her phone, I had music playing low, completely normal ride energy, the kind of silence that doesn't feel awkward because both people are just doing their own thing. Then, around the 5-minute mark, she asked me a question that I've turned over in my head more times than I can count since that night. She asked, "Can we take the long way?" I told her sure, no problem, thinking she just wanted more time to finish a phone call or didn't want to go home yet for whatever personal reason. I asked if there was a specific route she wanted, and she said no, just anywhere that wasn't the direct way. I took a slightly longer route through a couple of side streets, figuring that would satisfy her. About 2 minutes later, she asked again, "Can we go a different way? Longer, if that's okay." Something about the way she said it the second time made the hair on my arm stand up, though I couldn't have told you why in that moment. Her voice hadn't changed in tone, hadn't gotten more urgent or scared sounding. If anything, it was flat, almost rehearsed, like she was reciting something she needed to say rather than expressing an actual preference. I glanced at her in the rearview mirror, and she was looking down at her phone, but her thumb wasn't moving. The screen wasn't lit up in a way that suggested she was actually using it. I took another detour, adding maybe 4 or 5 more minutes to the ride. She didn't say thank you or acknowledge it at all. She just kept looking at her phone that didn't seem to be doing anything. Then, at a red light, she said something that I will never forget as long as I live. Still looking down at her phone, in that same flat voice, she said, "He's still behind us." I hadn't seen another car following us. I'd been checking my mirrors out of habit the entire ride, the way any driver does, and there had been a handful of other cars on the road, but nothing had stood out as consistently trailing us. I asked her what she meant, who was behind us, and she didn't answer. She just kept staring at her phone. I checked my mirrors again at the red light. There was a single car about 4 car lengths back, headlights on, just sitting there like any other car waiting at a red light might. I couldn't see the driver, couldn't make out the make or model clearly in the dark, just a shape with 2 headlights. The light turned green. I drove forward. The car behind us drove forward too, staying the same distance back. I told myself this meant nothing. It was 2 a.m. on a mostly empty road. There weren't many other directions for another car to logically go, and people follow the same route as you all the time without it meaning anything sinister. Commuters, other rideshare drivers heading toward the same part of town, delivery drivers finishing their own late shifts. I've thought about that rationalization 100 times since, trying to decide if I actually believed it in the moment or if I just needed to believe it to keep driving normally, to keep my hands steady on the wheel and my foot steady on the gas pedal instead of panicking on a dark road with a passenger I didn't know anything about. I took one more turn, a turn that had no reason to be part of any direct route to her destination, purely to test something I didn't want to admit I was testing. I told myself I was just being extra cautious, taking a route that felt safer somehow, but really I knew exactly what I was doing. The car behind us took the same turn, without hesitation, without slowing down to reconsider, like the driver already expected me to make that exact move. At that point, my hands were sweating on the steering wheel. I asked her again, more firmly this time, who was behind us and if she was in some kind of trouble I should know about. She finally looked up from her phone, and for the first time the entire ride, she made direct eye contact with me in the rearview mirror. She said, very calmly, "Just get me to the address. He won't do anything as long as you keep driving." I didn't know what to do with that information. Calling the police felt like an overreaction based on nothing concrete: a car behind us on a mostly empty road, a passenger acting strange, but something about her tone, the total lack of panic in a situation that logically should have had some panic in it, told me this wasn't nothing. I drove directly to her drop-off point after that, no more detours. The car behind us followed the entire way, maintaining that same 4-car length distance regardless of speed or turns. When I pulled up to her address, an apartment complex, well lit, Other cars in the parking lot. She got out quickly without saying goodbye or rating the ride or doing any of the normal end of trip things people do. She didn't walk toward the apartment building. She walked directly toward the car that had been following us, which had pulled up and stopped about 30 feet behind mine. I sat there for a moment, engine still running, watching in my rearview mirror as she approached the other car's passenger window. I couldn't see who was inside. She leaned down toward the window for a few seconds, said something I couldn't hear, and then the car pulled away and drove off into the night. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment, watching it go, and then walked into the apartment building without ever looking back at my car. I drove away immediately, hands still shaking on the wheel. I didn't take another ride for the rest of that night. I've thought about reporting it, but reporting what? Exactly. A passenger who asked for a longer route and made a cryptic comment about someone following us, who then calmly walked toward the very car she claimed to be worried about. There was no crime I witnessed, no license plate I'd thought to memorize in the moment, nothing concrete enough to hand to a police officer without sounding like I was describing a dream rather than an actual event. I don't know what I witnessed that night. I don't know if she was in danger and somehow resolved it, or if the entire thing was staged for a reason I'll never understand, or if I misread the whole situation from start to finish and there's some mundane explanation involving people I don't know and circumstances I'll never be told about. What I do know is that for months afterward, I checked my mirrors obsessively on every late-night ride, glancing back far more often than any driver reasonably needs to, and I never picked up another 2 a.m. fare from a residential address again without feeling a small knot form in my stomach the moment the pickup notification came through. That's the first story. We've got one more coming up right now, this one from a delivery driver, and honestly, it still makes my skin crawl a little every time I read through it. This one comes from someone who spent a few years doing food delivery, mostly late-night shifts in a mid-sized suburban area. If you've ever wondered what it's like walking up to a stranger's door alone at 1 in the morning, this one might make you think twice about ordering food that late again. Story 2. The Repeat Customer. I delivered food for almost 3 years while I was working through community college, mostly picking up shifts from 8 p.m. to 2 a.m. because the tips were noticeably better late at night, especially on weekends when people were ordering after coming home from bars or parties. It was flexible work, which mattered a lot with my class schedule, and most nights were completely uneventful. You drive somewhere, you hand someone a bag of food, they say thanks, you leave. It's about as low stakes as a job can get, at least in theory, and for the vast majority of my 3 years doing it, that theory held up perfectly fine. There was one address, though, that I want to talk about, because it's the reason I eventually quit that job entirely, even though the money was genuinely good and I didn't have anything else lined up at the time. I'd never quit a job before without something else already set up, but after everything that happened with this particular house, I didn't feel like I had much of a choice. The first time I delivered to this house, everything was completely normal. It was a modest single-story house on a quiet residential street, nothing unusual about the property itself, a little overgrown on the lawn, a car in the driveway that looked like it hadn't moved in a while, but nothing that would make you think twice walking up to the door. A man answered, probably in his 50s, thanked me, tipped reasonably well through the app, and that was that. I didn't think about that delivery again until about 2 weeks later, when I got another order to the exact same address, which wasn't unusual in itself since regular customers reordering from the same place happened all the time in delivery work. This second time, something felt slightly different, though I couldn't have told you what specifically at the time, and honestly I almost didn't mention it to anyone afterward because it seemed too small to matter. The porch light was off, which hadn't been the case the first visit, and it took him longer to answer the door than most people usually do when they're expecting food and can hear a car pull into the driveway. When he did open the door, he seemed to look past me for a moment, out toward the street, before actually looking at me and taking the bag. He didn't say much, just a quiet thanks, and shut the door fairly quickly compared to the first visit, where he'd lingered a bit making small talk about the weather. I want to be clear that neither of these deliveries would have stood out to me individually if I hadn't ended up going back a third time about a month after that, since by that point I'd delivered to hundreds of different addresses and most small oddities like a porch light being off just blended into the general noise of the job. This third delivery is where things started feeling genuinely wrong, though even now, describing it out loud, I'm aware that on paper it doesn't sound like much, and I've had friends politely tell me it just sounds like an unusual house, nothing more. I pulled into the driveway, and before I even got out of my car, I noticed the front door was already slightly open, just a few inches, with no light visible from inside the house at all. Every other delivery I'd ever done, people either had lights on inside or came to the door only once you knocked, standing there fully in the doorway with the hall light behind them. An open door with total darkness behind it, at nearly 1 a.m., was different from anything I'd experienced before in 3 years of doing this job. I sat in my car for a moment longer than I normally would have, engine still running, trying to decide if I should just leave the food on the porch and go, which is an option the app allows for contactless delivery specifically designed for situations that feel slightly off. Something made me want to just get it over with the normal way, though, some part of me telling myself that avoiding the house entirely would be an overreaction, so I walked up, and I called out a greeting as I approached, the way I always did on every single delivery regardless of the property. Nobody responded. The door remained open those same few inches, no movement, no sound from inside. I knocked lightly on the door frame, since the door itself was already ajar, and said the name on the order, asking if everything was okay. Still nothing. I could hear what sounded like a television playing somewhere deep in the house, very faintly, but no footsteps, no voice, nothing indicating anyone was coming to the door. I made the decision to leave the bag on the porch step, take a photo for the app as proof of delivery like the option allows, and go. As I was crouching down to set the bag on the ground, I heard, from somewhere inside that dark house, a voice say my name. Not the customer's name being confused for mine. My actual first name, the same name displayed on the delivery app to the customer for that specific order. I froze in place, still crouched by the door. I told myself immediately that this had a simple explanation. The app displays the driver's name to the customer before delivery, so obviously he could have seen my name and simply said it, maybe to get my attention, maybe as a normal greeting. That's a completely reasonable explanation, and I want to be honest that in the moment, some part of me tried very hard to accept that explanation immediately so I could just finish the delivery and leave. But the way it was said didn't match a greeting. It was low, almost testing, like someone repeating a word slowly to make sure they'd pronounced it correctly. And it came from somewhere deeper in the house than the front hallway, not from someone standing right behind that door, but from further back, like from a room down a hallway I couldn't see into. I stood up quickly, said something like "Here's your order" in a voice that came out far less steady than I wanted it to, and walked back to my car without waiting for any response. As I was pulling out of the driveway, I glanced back at the house, and the front door, which had been open those few inches the entire time I was there, was now closed completely. I sat in my car at the end of the street for a few minutes before I could make myself drive away, trying to process what exactly had just happened and whether I was overreacting to something that had a mundane explanation I just wasn't seeing clearly in the moment. I didn't get another order to that address for almost 2 months. When I did, I was still working the same delivery job, and I want to be honest that a large part of me hoped I would simply not get assigned to that particular delivery, but the app doesn't let you decline individual orders without penalty, at least not in a way that was sustainable if I wanted to keep making money at that job. This fourth delivery, I made the decision beforehand that I would use the contactless option no matter what, leave the bag on the porch, take my photo, and leave immediately without knocking or calling out at all. I pulled into the driveway, and everything about the house looked completely normal this time. Porch light on, a light visible through the front window, the ordinary signs of someone simply living their life inside. I walked up, set the bag down as quickly as I could, and as I was straightening up to take the required photo for the app, the front door opened. The same man from the very first delivery stood there, and for a moment, everything about the interaction seemed completely ordinary. He said thank you, reached down for the bag, and just as I turned to walk back to my car, he said, "You're the one who comes here most, right?" I told him I wasn't sure, that I did a lot of deliveries in the area. He nodded slowly and said, "She said you'd come back eventually." I asked him who she was, mostly out of a kind of automatic politeness rather than any real desire to know the answer, and he just looked at me for a long moment without responding, an expression on his face that I still can't fully describe. Not hostile, not friendly, just entirely unreadable, like he was deciding something. Then he said, "Never mind," picked up the bag, and closed the door. I never got assigned to that address again after that fourth delivery, though I don't know if that was coincidence or if something in the algorithm changed based on how long each delivery took, since my fourth one had technically taken slightly longer than average because of that conversation. I quit the delivery job entirely about 2 months later for reasons that had nothing to do with this house, but I'd be lying if I said this specific address wasn't part of why I didn't feel bad about leaving that job behind. I've told a few friends this story over the years, and most of them focus on the voice saying my name as the scariest part, which I understand completely. There's something uniquely unsettling about a stranger's voice using your actual name from somewhere you can't see, in a house that's supposed to be empty of anyone who should know that name at all. But for me, it's always been that single sentence at the very end. "She said you'd come back eventually." I never asked who she was, and I never will, since I have no way of finding out short of driving back to that house myself, which is something I have never once considered doing even in the years since. Some nights, lying awake, I think that not asking was the smartest decision I made that entire year. Other nights, staring at the ceiling at 2 or 3 in the morning for no particular reason, I think it might have been the biggest mistake, that maybe there was something I needed to hear and chose not to, and I'll simply never know which of those two feelings is the right one to trust. And that's it for today. If either of these hit a little too close to home, you're not alone, trust me, the comment section usually agrees. If you enjoyed this one, hit subscribe, it genuinely helps more than you'd think. And if something like this has ever happened to you while driving rideshare or doing deliveries, send it my way. You might hear your own story on here next. Stay safe out there. I'll see you in the next one.